Center for Transit Research here at the University of South Florida. He manages the largest university-based transit research program in the country. Joel's reports have been published and distributed nationally by the U.S. DOT and the Transit Cooperative Research Program. He's a frequent speaker at state and national transit conferences. Prior to joining Nectar, Joel was the director of Broward County Transit in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He currently serves as a member of the board of directors of the Florida Public Transportation Association. Joel earned his master's degree from Columbia University in urban planning, and he's a graduate of the very first Leadership APTA class and the chairman of its alumni association. So with that, I'd like to welcome to the webcast Joel Valinsky.
Jennifer, thank you very much. If you could put on that first slide, and I'd like to thank everybody else who is joining us today, especially some of the names that I see that are names of people who helped a great deal in providing the information I needed to complete this project. So a special thanks to them and season's greetings to everyone. Jennifer, just a sound check. Am I sounding clear?
Yes, sounds great, Joel.
Okay, great. Very good. Well, the subject of this webcast is, as you see, implementation and outcomes of fare-free transit systems. And to give you an idea of the background and purpose, this is a project that was selected by the Transit Cooperative Research Program, and it's funded through them as part of their synthesis process. And I was fortunate enough to be selected by the panel to be the PI for the project. It was completed in October of last year, and it's been approved. It's just in the process right now of being published and will probably be available for you to get from their website in January or February of next year. And I'd also like to clarify that the purpose of the project was not so much to offer opinions as to whether or not fare-free transit was the right policy to adopt. It was not to offer opinions on whether it was good or bad, but really to find out what the experience had been of those agencies that had adopted that policy, so that we could then share those experiences with anyone else who might be interested in establishing that kind of fare policy. So to define it first, we have to clarify that when we talk about fare-free, it's defined as public transportation that requires no payment or no proof of payment by any passenger when they board a transit vehicle. All they need to do is stand at a bus stop, and when the bus comes, they can get on and take their ride. And we should also clarify that the study examined only those transit systems that provided fare-free transit on all elements and all areas of their service area. In other words, there are a lot of fare-free transit services that are provided perhaps in downtown with downtown shuttles, or even the Staten Island Ferry, which carries a lot of people. But Staten Island Ferry is part of a larger MTA system. We were only looking at transit systems where all elements of their service were fare-free. And we also wanted to make sure that these transit systems were either direct recipients or sub-recipients of federal transit grants, because there are a lot of local community shuttles. And right here where I am in South Florida, there's at least 30 of them, but they don't receive federal grants. They might receive funding from the county or the city that they're in, but they don't provide fare-free transit as far as we are looking at in terms of being a recipient of federal grants. Now, we talk about fare-free transit, but needless to say, somebody's paying for this service. Perhaps not the passengers when they board, but someone is paying, and the sources to pay for the service are fairly familiar in terms of sales tax or real estate taxes, a payroll tax out in Oregon. 5311 funds contribute quite a bit to a number of systems. Out in Oregon, they also established a transit fee, if you will, $2.75 a month on residential units that went to pay for the transit system when they discontinued charging fares. But there are other sources, particularly in some of the resort communities or university towns that are a little non-traditional, including parking fee revenues, ski lift surcharges, partners such as major medical centers. In some towns, there are casinos that help to pay for the service. In Hawaii, they actually charge a baggage fee if you are carrying a package that's more of a certain size. And in other areas, they actually do collect donations. Now, how did we go about this? The one thing to do was we had to find the transit agencies, and it was not an easy task, because if you were to ask anybody about a year ago, well, how many agencies are out there providing fare-free service, the answer you would most commonly get is 6 or 7. And I thought, wow, are we going to do a whole project here just for the sake of looking at 6 or 7 agencies? And in fact, when I did contact some of the agencies, they thought they were the only ones providing fare-free transit in the country. So we had to find out just how many there were, and in order to do this, we did the classical literature search through TRIS and TRID, contacted the transit management companies that manage well over 100 transit systems in the country, worked with committees at TRB and APTA, the Community Transportation Association of America, who usually works with smaller systems. We contacted them as well. Did a lot of internet searching on all the different engines, contacted some of the state transit associations that might know who is offering fare-free service. And probably one of the best sources was the listservs that we maintain here at CUTR, where we have access to 5,000 individuals. And we asked them, can they inform us of any that they might be aware of? And so we finally found out who they were, and we sent quite a long survey, as those who were on the phone who completed it will attest to, and received the information back. And what we found is that there weren't 6 or 7 or 8, that there were at least 39. And I know there's a few more that I found out about after the project was done. And 32 of them were good enough to fill out that long survey. Now, there were also some other systems that had provided fare-free service in the past and had discontinued, but they also provided some responses which allowed us to know, well, why did you discontinue? Because that's just as important to know. And when we got the surveys back, I followed up with an awful lot of phone calls and emails to make sure I could clarify whatever I had received, and was able to then go and do the report. And what we were trying to find out, it was the basic information of, where are these systems located? Who are these systems? And when I say that, I mean, are they large? Are they small? Are they in rural areas and more urban areas? Why did they establish the fare policy? What was the dynamics in the community? What was the driving force? And most importantly, what has been their experience? Has ridership increased? Has public acceptance of the system increased? All kinds of questions of that nature that we'll get into here very, very shortly. And here for the first time is a map of all of the transit systems that are providing fare-free transit that we were able to find. As you can see, and you may have noticed when people were filling out the survey we took of all of you who called in today, that people were calling in from all over the country, and it's no surprise, because the fare-free transit systems are located in 19 different states. And you can probably see that there's a real concentration in the Colorado area, and you can see where the ski resorts are located. But they're also located in the Northwest, and there are all the way to the Northeast, all the way down south, and all points in between. So it was a very interesting process to find out that there were so many transit systems that were providing totally fare-free service. Now, who are these folks? How do you categorize them? How do we describe who's providing this service? And what I found was that with all 39, they fell into one of these 3 categories above, or on the screen, that they were either small urban or rural communities, or they were resort communities, usually ski resorts, but other types of resorts as well, with major casinos nearby, or they were in communities that had a major university presence. And it makes good sense, and we'll find out why here in just a moment. So let's talk about why there were so many in the small urban and rural communities. And the primary reason is that it simply made economic sense. The business case was there to make to their board of directors that it would cost almost as much to collect the fares as the value of the fares themselves, because there's a lot of factors that go into collecting fares beyond fare boxes. You have the accounting for it, you have the safeguarding of it, all of the audits that must be done, etc. And the smaller communities, where they're generally making less than 10% of what it costs to operate the service from their fare box can make a pretty strong case that, you know what, we're working a lot for next to nothing in terms of making actual money. And in some cases, and particularly in states that have state funding that they provide to their local transit systems by formula, there were systems that can actually demonstrate that they would make more revenue by not charging a fare. In other words, if they could increase their ridership by enticing more people to use the service since it was fare-free, then the formulas that are used by the state to distribute money are going to be treating them favorably, because part of the formula is their total ridership. In Indiana, Marion, Indiana, they were able to actually double the amount of money they had been making from the fare box by eliminating their fare. And 5311 funds from the feds are also kind of peculiar, because while they are used to provide operating assistance, a transit agency has to first, when they apply for their grant, say how much money they are making through the fare box, and that gets eliminated in terms of how much money they can receive from the feds. So if they eliminate the fare, they can actually bring in more federal dollars and allow their own residents to ride for free. So it's a great deal for the locals. Now, also in rural areas, sometimes they are really covering some pretty large distances. And for people who, especially during this time of recession, or well, we're out of the recession, but in terms of our economic doldrums and the high cost of gas, they're finding it much more attractive to use transit, and the fare-free nature of it makes it even more attractive. The one of the surprising things I heard is that, not that we're still out in the Wild West, but there are some robberies that take place in the more remote areas, and by not charging a fare, there's no money to steal. So it makes sense from that point of view. And also, when you are dealing with the smaller urban and rural areas, often you see not a tremendous amount of ridership, and so it's easy for people to criticize, hey, you know, you got a lot of empty buses running around, but by making it fare free, it helps to fill up the buses and make that criticism go away. So resort communities are also very keen on fare-free transit, and one of the reasons is that some of these towns, particularly those out in the West, in the Rockies, they have a tremendous variation in their population depending on the season. A place like Vail or Breckenridge can go from 2,000 population in the summer to 50 to 100,000 people in the winter. So you can imagine that there's just a crush that comes into those communities, and they'd like to be able to discourage people from using their cars if they possibly can. Also in resorts, they're usually fairly small geographically, and so the trips that people are taking are fairly short, and you really don't want to charge too much for a trip when they're only using it for a half a mile or perhaps a mile, maybe a little bit more. There are crush loads of people, particularly in ski resorts, where they have their ski suits on and they're headed toward the slopes, and this allows people to board. The fare-free nature of it allows people to board both the front door and the rear door to help people board more quickly. They're also wearing heavy, bulky clothes. It's very difficult to reach in your pocket, and those who have skied know how many pockets you have. You might forget where your change might be. So this makes it easier on people there. They can just worry about holding on to their ski equipment and getting on the bus. People that are in resorts are there for a little vacation and a little fun. They like to party and they like to drink, and you'd rather not have them drive after they do. So offering free fare transit is another attractive feature for people, that they don't have to worry about how much they drink, and they can take the bus back home. The resort areas also have people who are usually having to live outside of the resort itself, because it's just so very, very expensive. In fact, the living wage in some of these resorts is $17 an hour. So typically they have to work a number of miles outside of the city to find affordable housing. And by offering free fare transit to them, it helps the resort areas attract and retain the employees they need to provide service to all the visitors. And as one of our respondents indicated, that, hey, transit is just part of the economic engine of the town. Everything they do is about improving the economy of their community, and they all recognize that. Now, why have we seen it in university-dominated communities? Actually, my question is why we didn't see it in more of them. And here again, bear in mind, we're not talking about just the campus. We're talking about communities that serve the campus and the rest of the surrounding community, all with one service. And we found 8 different systems that do that around the country. And part of the reason they do it is that the students typically prepay. They prepay, and when they get on board the bus, they don't have to pay a fare. And that would leave anywhere from maybe 1% to perhaps 20% of the rest of the passengers having to pay when 80% aren't. And in many cases, those other passengers are either low income or minority passengers. And there's just something about that everybody knows doesn't look right, doesn't feel right. And they just figured when, hey, only 20% of the people or less are paying cash, perhaps we can simply forego that if we can get other local sources of support and make it free for everybody, and everybody's on an equal status and nobody is looked on differently. Universities are very supportive of fare-free transit because it helps them reduce the number of parking facilities they need to build, whether they're surface parking or parking garages. Allows them to build more dormitories, more classroom spaces, more anything else that they would like to do. It makes the campus safer for pedestrians with fewer cars on the campus. And as we know, universities tend to be very up and aware of what's going on with livability and sustainability, and it's consistent with going green. So let's just take a quick brief look at the history of free fare policies in the United States. And this topic did really focus on the United States. As everybody probably knows, the public transportation was historically provided by private companies way back when, up until right about 1970, thereabouts. And those private companies did charge a fare. They were regulated in terms of how much they could charge, but they charged a fare. And I think that once public agencies took over the transit systems, they simply continued to charge the same or similar fares. But since the 1960s, public transit agencies have considered providing fare-free service. And in fact, there's a couple of them that have been doing it since then. One in Commerce, California, outside of LA, and one in East Chicago, Indiana. They've done it. They started it then, and they're still doing it today, 50 years later. And some other systems, though, started experimenting with free fares as we got into the 1970s and 1980s. And there were a number of demonstrations, and a lot of people know about them, and we won't go into great detail about them. But the best known were in Denver and Trenton. They were funded by at the time, the Urban Mass Transit Administration. And the experiment dealt with providing transit on a fare-free basis just during the off-peak hours. In other words, from 10 in the morning till 2 in the afternoon, and then after 6 p.m. and on weekends. And what they found was that they did get a pretty healthy increase in ridership during those times. And they also found that about 35% of all the new trips that were attracted were made previously by automobile, which is a pretty good result. However, even though they probably should have anticipated that they were going to get a lot more ridership, excuse me, they really didn't do the best job in terms of preparing for that. And as a consequence, they didn't put more buses on the route. They didn't have enough security. And they ended up having some problems with schedule adherence, buses running late because of all the additional passengers they were carrying. And there was some rowdiness that was reported, particularly by younger people and students. And there was quite a bit of overcrowding, again, because they didn't put more buses out there. And so these experiments took a full year. They were in place for a full year, but they were discontinued after that year. Because they felt that, well, you know what, we can probably achieve a pretty good increase in ridership if we just perhaps reduce the fares or package our fares in a different way, and we would avoid some of these other problems that we experienced with free fares. One of the more talked about experiments was in Austin, Texas, and instead of only providing free fares during the peak hours, they made it fare-free all day, every day. And they did this for 15 months, from October of 1989 through the end of December of 1990. And it was not federally funded. It was simply done at the initiative of the local transit system. The community had just passed a local sales tax to support transit, and they wanted to be able to show the community, here's what you are getting for your tax dollars. And so it wasn't federally funded, and there isn't a specific report that we could look at and find some of the answers. And many people had different interpretations of what happened. Without a doubt, ridership in the area went up in big time, up to 70-75%. But some people question, well, how much of that was due to the free fare versus how much of it was due to the fact that they started serving the University of Texas at that point, or that they increased service during that time as well. And management was willing to do this, although they had warned their board that there could be some real issues that we'll have to deal with. And as it turned out, they did have a lot of issues, particularly with truants. School buses were running empty, and they were all on board the local buses at that point, and just creating some problems and doing a little bit of destruction. And there was more costs of maintenance, etc. And while there are some surveys that indicate that at least 75% of the people were satisfied and still happy with the service, the bus operators themselves were starting to really get aggravated. In fact, one of the quotes is that they were almost at the point of insurrection, and they were concerned for the safety of their passengers and also for themselves. And they went to the board themselves and pleaded to end this experiment, and the board agreed to do so. So that was it for the free fare experiments on a big basis for a while. But really, it was only just getting started, but it was starting quietly. In a lot of small systems in the state of Washington, they had passed a motor vehicle excise tax, which provided localities with a great deal of money to be able to provide transit. And I think some of the tact was that, hey, you're already paying for transit. We're not going to charge a fare, and you're already paying for it, so why not use it? Ski resort towns in the Rockies started to realize that, well, you know what, in order to increase our economic advantage, why don't we provide a free service to make the people's experience that much more pleasant? And once one started doing it, everybody else more or less said, if we're going to be competitive with the ski resort next door or down the road, we'll probably have to do it as well. A lot of new small starts around the country, and I don't mean the major small starts with capital projects, but little systems in small areas. Again, we're not going to make much money out of the fare box. They wanted to encourage people to use their system, and so they made it fare free, and for the most part, they remain fare free. And during that time as well, in the early 1990s, a few universities saw those advantages we talked about before in terms of making the campus safer and not having to pay for parking, etc. And now it's fairly common within a campus to have prepaid services that the students can use at no cost when they board the bus, but there are now more that are also serving the surrounding community. Now, I know this table's got a lot of information, but what I wanted to show you was the ridership impacts that small urban and rural areas have experienced as they provided responses to the survey. And what you can see is if we go here in the actual ridership increase, while the advanced transit system in New Hampshire didn't make any predictions, they went from a 50-cent fare, I believe it was, to no fare. And within 1 year, their ridership increased 32%. Edmond Transit in Oklahoma, still a relatively small community, I believe that's Oklahoma State University. They reduced their fare from, I believe it was $1 down to $0. And while they thought they might get 40 to 80% increase in ridership, they actually ended up experiencing a 200% increase in 8 months. And in Hawaii, the large island of Hawaii in the island chain there, they had been charging a $1 fare, but in 2005, they decided to eliminate the fare, even though they do charge if you bring out a larger package, and their ridership has increased by 205% during the 5 or 6 year period that it's been fare free without a great deal of expansion of service at all. And when we asked, what would happen if you were to charge a fare again for those who were already fare free and perhaps had always been fare free, the predictions were anywhere from 20% up to 50%. So you can see that in the small systems, the experience has been that ridership has increased probably more than most expected. And if they were to eliminate the fare, to institute a fare again, it would be a major hit on the ridership. In resort areas, we're also looking at places that went from charging a fare in Glenwood Springs. They discontinued the fare, made it fare free, and within 4 months, their ridership had increased 125%. In Park City, basically the same experience. It took a couple months longer, but they were up there by that amount very, very shortly. And in Steamboat Springs, they expected a 20% increase, but they had a 53% increase within 2 years after eliminating a 50-cent fare. And in university communities, there was some interesting information that was provided. You see up here in Cache Valley, which is up in northern Utah, they have always been fare free. I think it was since 1991. But they were asked, well, what would happen if you instituted the fare? What would the drop be? Their estimate was they would lose as much as 54% of their ridership. But what was also interesting was that they said that it wouldn't matter if we charged a fare of 50 cents or $1 or $2. Just the fact that you have to institute a fare is enough to discourage people from riding. And my personal experience also would indicate that that's probably not an unreasonable assumption. A few years back, Miami Beach had an electric shuttle that they had no fare on, and also Santa Barbara did the same thing with electric buses. They charged no fare. But when they put in just a 25-cent fare in both places, ridership dropped 45%. And we'll talk about that just a little bit. In Chapel Hill, North Carolina, they went from no fare to went from fare to no fare, and within 9 months they've increased 43%. Same thing happened, same number actually, in Corvallis, Oregon, where they expected a 20 to 50% increase, and within 2 months they were already up 43%. I haven't checked with them lately. My guess is they're probably higher than that now. Go West Transit at the University of Western Illinois, they eliminated a $1 fare for people that were non-students in the community, and ridership went up 200%. Streamline Transit in Montana expected 200 passengers a day more than what they were carrying. They got 1,200 more a day. So these are the sort of experiences that various communities have had, and it doesn't matter what kind of community you are. When you go fare free, you will increase your ridership. But it's important to know what's going to be the nature of those riders. Are you really going to be taking a lot of cars off the road? And certainly, to some extent, some cars are taken off the road. But the increased ridership with the literature search that we've done indicates that most of the people will either be existing passengers riding more often, just as if you had a car and you wanted to jump in the car anytime you want and go anywhere you want anytime. And now the existing passengers can jump on the bus and go anywhere they want anytime. Bicyclists are more prone to go ahead and instead of saving money on a fare, just say, hey, let me put my bike on the bus and complete my trip that way. Seniors who are more sensitive to pricing tend to ride more when there's a free fare, as well as students who are also sensitive to price, as well as lower income people. And reducing what are already low fares to zero simply isn't enough to change the travel behavior of most people who prefer driving their own vehicle, because the cost of gas is really one of the lowest costs of owning a car. You've got the amortization, you've got maintenance, you've got insurance, you've got all kinds of costs with a car. And yes, the price of gas has gone up, but it hasn't gone up so much that people would say, well, the heck with this. Well, the majority of people, a lot of people are changing their minds now and using it since it's fare free, but not perhaps in the numbers you might hope. Perhaps between 10 and 20% of the new passengers will be people who had been driving, and that's not insignificant, but I just wanted to indicate that the majority of passengers will be those who were not driving their own car. Jennifer, just a sound check again. Is everything still clear?
Yes, everything is clear, Joel.
Okay, great. Thank you. Should have asked that about 10 minutes ago. Okay. Now, what has been the reaction of passengers to fare-free systems? And we asked that on our survey, and regardless of what kind of community people were representing, the vast majority absolutely support it. As one person out in New Mexico said, hey, we offer a quality service for free. You can't beat it. People love it. just as importantly, perhaps, is that the operators like it very much. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but it also allows them to develop more rapport with their passengers, and the passengers like that. There's no more disputes at the fare box, and it's just a friendlier atmosphere when there's no fare box there. Now, some resorts do receive complaints about transients, about alcoholics, about vagrants, and other communities do express concern with the rowdiness of teenagers. But these agencies also indicate that, well, we really don't think that there's that much more of an issue with fare-free transit than there is with transit systems that charge a fare. If 1% of our passengers fall into that category, that's something we can live with, and that's probably the extent of it from their point of view. And in fact, the passengers like the service so much and don't want to lose it that, while it might seem a little ironic, they often want to make voluntary contributions. They say, how can we help? We don't want to lose this service. Please let us know if there's something we can do. Would you accept a gift? And the picture you see here is a fare box from, well, not a fare box, just a drop box at Goal Line Transit in Indian River County, Florida. And it just invites people, if they wish, they can make that kind of a contribution, and some do and some don't. There's no pressure, and everything's fine. And Advanced Transit in New Hampshire actually gets $100,000 a year just in philanthropic contributions. So yes, the communities are very supportive of this where it's been implemented. As I mentioned before, one of the concerns and one of the great issues, particularly after the incidents in Austin, Texas, was, well, are we going to be inviting a lot of problems and a lot of trouble? And as I mentioned before, the percentage of people that are of that nature are really quite small. And students, whether they pay a fare or don't pay a fare, they're going to be rowdy. Yes, there'll be more of them without a fare. But the drivers, the bus operators themselves are very happy to make that trade, saying, yeah, we'll deal with a few more, call them what you will, problem passengers, in order for us not to have to deal with the fare box and all the disputes that go on with, hey, is this transfer valid or not? You didn't put in the right amount. They're glad not to do that, and they're glad to be better ambassadors for their transit system and for the community. It also makes some sense that this issue is less of a problem in smaller communities where people they tend to know each other better, and the passengers on board might even know this teenager that comes on as the son or daughter of one of their friends, and they often help the operator to calm down somebody that might be getting a little out of hand. But having said all that, it's still good. It's still good to have security cameras on your bus to let everybody know that, hey, any inappropriate behavior is being recorded. Good to have a passenger conduct code in place that gives you the authority to remove passengers if they are being a problem. Also helpful if you might have a sheriff's substation at your transit transfer center, and to have good relations with your court system in the event that you do have to bring someone in. Agreements that passengers have to sign before they're allowed to come back on the bus. And a community education program, which I believe is being done out in Mason, Washington, where there is a person that's there that goes out to different community groups, and particularly the schools, and works with them to tell them what their rights are to use the bus, but also their responsibilities. And it's also there to go to bus stops and help educate people at bus stops as well, that, hey, this is a service our community is proud of. Let's keep it one that we can all be proud of. So oddly enough, it didn't really seem to matter what kind of community in terms of their politics, where these systems are located. You could be liberal, you could be very conservative, or somewhere in between. And these systems that offer fare-free service, they are present in all of those types of communities. The big question is, what is the business case you can make for it? And certainly there are people that still resent the fact that, hey, wait a minute, how come they're getting a direct benefit with this transit service, but they're not paying for anything? But needless or no matter, people, when a good business case can be made, They are convinced that, yeah, it may seem a little odd, but it makes sense to do this. 15 of the 39 respondents said they've never had any complaints, so the community just loves it. Others say that, yep, we do have to defend this policy almost every year because budgets are getting tight. And there are people who will say, well, wait a minute, we're contributing to this service. You're asking us to match federal grants and state grants and to help pay for it. Why should the people that are using the service actually pay for it? And it is getting a little more difficult for those who are operating these kind of services when the economic climate is getting so challenging. But again, the clear majority, absolute majority of transit managers reported that this isn't a major issue, and a number of them said that, hey, our system is a real point of pride in our community. Now, there are other issues that you need to be aware of before you provide a service like this, and does it affect schedule reliability? And you would think at first, well, hey, it should help because nobody has to stop and dig for money and stop the fare box while the bus has to stop for that. But kind of depends. If you're in a more rural or small area, you're probably going to start picking up a lot more passengers, and the acceleration and deceleration of getting in and out of bus stops takes more time than the few seconds it takes to put money in a fare box. So you have to be careful about it, and but it is usually the case that schedules are more easy to keep if you have fare free, and certainly in places like resort towns and universities where you get crush loads. They couldn't even imagine charging a fare. It would take forever to go a mile if everybody had to pay in a fare box. So, a number or a few noted that average boarding time is less, but increased boardings can slow the bus, as I said. So you really probably should take a look at whether you ought to judiciously decrease the number of bus stops so that you don't have as many times that the bus is decelerating, stopping, dwelling, and then accelerating again if you go into a fare-free system. So what are the benefits of fare-free transit? It democratizes the transit system. It puts it on a par with things like schools or libraries or parks where people, most parks, where people, they don't have to pay in order to go through the school doors or the library doors or usually the park doors. And it's a statement saying that we think this is extremely important, and no matter what your income is, you can use it, and you can use it as often as you like. And you can use it to get anywhere in our community, and it connects you with all the things that we have. It makes it easier, of course. It drops that barrier of the fare box, and nobody has to worry about, do I have the right and exact change? Do I have to know what the policy is? No, just go to the bus stop, get on board, and enjoy your ride. It also allows people who are, particularly in the lower income strata, more money to spend on other necessities and that they tend to spend on locally. So rather than their money going into a fare box, it goes into buying food or clothes for their kids or whatever it is that they might need. And it actually, I think, helps the local economy. The systems report, of course, increased ridership, as we saw. And with that comes better performance metrics. You have, greater passengers per hour. You have much lower subsidy per passenger and better overall use of the system. We noted earlier that there are some formulas that include ridership in them when they determine how much money is going to be provided by the state or the feds, and it increases the money they get from out of the area, and they bring it into their own area, which is good news for them and their economy. Generally speeds up the boarding process, generally helps with schedule adherence, absolutely helps in resorts and in universities. We mentioned before that the bus drivers themselves like it a great deal. And at the university level, there are some communities that have more than one university in their community, and it allows the students to attend any of the classes at any of the universities more easily. The benefits list goes on, and believe me, this is kind of a short list, but clearly helps to reduce the traffic congestion in communities like the resort communities. I believe it was Vail, Colorado, that said they think they take 500,000 car trips per year off the road by encouraging people to use their fare-free transit. There are fewer people that are drinking that are on the road, again, in those, particularly the resort communities, but also on college campuses. We know students have the drunk bus, as they call it, and this gives them another opportunity to get around very inexpensively. Parking facilities, they don't have to build so many of them at the campuses, as we mentioned. The economic competitiveness of the area is enhanced. The areas become better known, and in fact, they tend to win a lot of awards. Advanced Transit in New Hampshire is in a community now that is regarded by Money Magazine as the second best place to live in the country. Chapel Hill was recognized by CNN as the best place to live in the country, and part of it was their fare-free system. Clemson Area Transit in South Carolina won awards from ICM, the International City Managers Association. And in fact, the Town and Gown Association decided to locate in Clemson because of the great work that the transit system had done to help bridge the differences between the townies that live in the community surrounding the campus and the students. And so they decided, hey, let's locate there. And people now are tending to choose the place they retire by how easy it's going to be for them to get around. And a number of communities now have recognized that and realized that it's going to bring their income into their community. There are some challenges, and we've talked about some of them, but one of them is that when you provide fare-free fixed route service, you also have to provide free ADA service. Although some kind of get around that by doing route deviation, though that gets a little bit tougher with fare-free since you're carrying more passengers. There is this public perception that you could solve your tight budget if you just started charging fares, but those people don't usually go through the process of realizing you're going to lose a lot of ridership and and you won't collect as much as you think when you figure out the costs of collecting the fares. There is the accusation that riders are not paying their own way, as I mentioned before, and some council and commission members do get a little bit upset about that. And when you get more ridership, it brings more responsibilities of maintenance, probably a bit more vandalism, to some extent more truants, and you might have to put more equipment on the road, and you better be aware of that before you adopt a policy of this nature, because just putting one additional bus on the road may cost you $400,000 a year. So if it's also good, and certainly the communities do love it, why aren't more more agencies doing it around the country? Well, I was able to find 4 agencies that had really taken a good, hard look at what it would cost to adopt fare-free policies. And these studies were pretty recent and in some pretty substantial areas like San Francisco and Portland, Eugene, Oregon, and Hamilton, Canada. And as you might guess, the primary stumbling block is just that they make a lot of money out of the fare box. And especially during these tight budget times and times of relatively weak economies, they don't have another option to tap into that would be politically feasible. And I'll show you in a moment what some of these expenses would be. The San Francisco case was particularly notable. They indicated that, wow, yes, we would save some money by not having to do a fare collection system, but they would also lose a great deal of money if they were to, or it would cost them a lot of money. It would cost them $184 million in net new operating expenses per year. And that's kind of tough to come by. TriMet, not as big a system, but certainly a substantial system, they'd have to come up with almost another $50 million. And they were looking for options on some sort of a regional parking fee, but they really didn't think they could make it work politically. Hamilton, Canada, they found that they would have to come up with another $31 million a year if they were going to provide fare-free service. So what are the outcomes of providing fare-free service? We've touched on them, but I'll try to summarize them here. That ridership is going to increase. It's just a question of by how much. From anywhere from 20% was the lowest I heard to as high as 200% in the United States, and a lot higher in Europe and China. There are some systems that have gone up 1,300%, but those are usually coupled with other public policy changes like reduced parking or very expensive parking, etc. What we did find was that you can't really have a good idea of how much your fare will increase because the Simpson-Curtin elasticity formula doesn't work when the denominator is 0. I mean, if you went from 25 cents to 50 cents, you would say you went up 100%, and you figured you would lose about 30% of your ridership, and vice versa. If you went from 50 cents to 25, you'd probably lose half your ridership. But when you go from 50 to nothing, it's going from 50 to infinity, and you can't do the math on that. So it's going to increase, and it's going to increase substantially. And there were some researchers that did some work for the state of Washington that I think had the best theory as to why that happens. And it's because, in their minds, that the psychological barrier that is associated with fare boxes is removed when you have fare-free transit. And so there, nobody has to worry, oh, do I have the right change? Will I be embarrassed in front of the operator and all these passengers? Once you remove that, it's great. And people are much more likely to jump on board because of it. And one of the outcomes is that you might have more disruptive passengers, but apparently it does not seriously affect passenger satisfaction or the acceptance in the community. The bus operators themselves are very supportive of it. Operations typically become more efficient and a little bit less expensive in terms of fare equipment and all the associated tasks. Resort communities realize they have to have it now in order to compete with their other resort communities, and universities like the green nature and the fact that they don't have to provide so much parking. Smaller communities, even though it hasn't made a huge difference in a lot of them, they can document that they've reduced traffic congestion, pollution, use of gas in cars, that they're proud of the fact that they now have this very democratic service that's available to everybody, just as some other public services are. And however, steps should be taken in preparation for some potential problems, even though they're not usually that serious. So anybody that would like to contact me about this can certainly do so by phoning me or emailing me at the address you see on the screen. I hope this information has been helpful. There's a lot more that's going to be in the report, including a complete annotated bibliography which summarizes all of the reports and literature that I was able to read, tons of tables, and I think you'll find it interesting. So with that, Jennifer, I'll close and just invite anyone who would like to ask questions to fire away.
Thank you, Joel. We do have some questions that have already come in, so I'll get right to those. The first one is, do you think most transit agencies know the cost of fare collection?
I think not. And in fact, I think most of them overestimate what the cost of fare collection is. Unless you're dealing with a really small system, generally, the cost of collecting fares is, and this is not my opinion, this is based on APTA research and other reports and other TCRP research, it's usually about 4, maybe up to 6% of the total revenues you bring in. So for systems of any size, to make the argument that, well, hey, we should eliminate fares because it costs as much just to collect them, it doesn't make good sense. You can't justify that. But in smaller systems where you're making, again, 10%, maybe only 5% of what it costs to run your system from the fare box, then it makes sense.
Okay. Any experience with systems providing one-day or free service, say on ozone action days?
Well, there's a lot of that, and there's all kinds of free service available throughout the country. I mentioned it up at the top, where you do have maybe downtown people movers that are free, or downtown CBD, central business like Fairless Square that existed in Portland, the Staten Island Ferry, local community shuttles. Jennifer, I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
Yes, it says any experience with systems providing one day of free service, say on ozone action days.
Yeah, that does happen. I didn't try to collect that information because the responsibility was to take a look at entire systems that provide fare-free service all day, every day. But there are a number of communities, obviously, in the areas where air pollution is worse that does that. And what I would say, though, is that there have been experiments that lasted only a month, 3 months, or 6 months. And in spite of that short time frame, most of them experienced ridership increases of anywhere from 60 to 80%. So even when it's of a short duration, free fares will attract passengers.
Okay, next question. For systems that have been fare-free for more than 1 year, has there been a particular percentage of ridership increase that's expected by the governing body to maintain support for continuing the fare-free system?
I didn't really hear that and didn't find that out. I think, for instance, out in Cache Valley, the board of directors felt like, hey, we don't think anybody's going to use this service, so let's do whatever we can to make it fare-free, to attract people to use it. And they did. And they found out that, whoa, quite a few people want to use this service, and they continued it all the way up to the present, 20 years later. But I didn't really hear anybody indicate that this is, well, no, I take that back. There were a few that did say this is a trial. We're not making any judgments. We're not setting any parameters up front. We're going to do the trial. But what happens when you do the trial or the demonstration was that they found out that people loved it and that they really used it and they really needed it. And again, if the economic case could be made that it made good sense not to charge a fare, then it just stayed in place. Okay.
Thank you. This question is from an audience member who attended UT Austin during the mid-1970s. It says the university shuttle bus system met your study requirements and was not part of the Austin system. Because of free fare and designated stops, system ridership exceeded the Austin transit system, and the efficiency was extraordinary. I wonder how the existing shuttle bus systems, which requires riders to pay a fare or show a university ID, compares to that previous arrangement.
Again, I have to apologize because I didn't really do that as part of the research. It was real clear we were to take a look at entire systems that had established a fare-free policy. And I'm sure that the numbers would be interesting, and I'm sure that the numbers for systems that are fare-free versus those that might collect a fare, the ridership would be much higher on the fare-free systems. And again, I think it's becoming much, much more common around the country for this to be in place. So it doesn't take too much persuading anymore for university transit systems to offer fare-free service. What I found was surprising was that there weren't more systems that serve both the outside community and the university. And I think I know the reason for that, and that's because the university system is typically operated by drivers who are students, perhaps non-union members, and the community is being served by people who are by union members who make much higher pay, and it would be very difficult to combine those two systems. But it sure would be nice if they could look at that more closely and see the benefits for the entire community.
Okay, thank you, Joel. Another question says, I may have missed this, but how did you control for items that could impact ridership, like new or adjusted routes, new technology like GPS tracking, etc.?
Right. There's all kinds of things that can confound any kind of analysis, but, and again, I say this with an apology, the point of a synthesis is not to analyze. They only pay you $25,000 to do these studies. And so the thing to do is collect information that's already been gathered and do the very best you can with interpreting that and providing that back out to the broader community. Usually, I think a lot of the systems said that, hey, we really didn't provide that much more additional service. There were a lot of cases like this, but just by going fare-free, that's what allowed us to get up to 60% or 80% or 200% in some cases. I did ask them that in the survey. Did you add a lot more service? Was there anything else that might have contributed to your increased ridership? Did you modify routes? What did you do? And most of them said no, we didn't. It was really just a matter of making it fare-free. The most recent one in Corvallis, Oregon, really made, incredibly minor changes to their system and to their hours, and yet within 2 months they were up 43%. And I'm sure if they had kept the same fares that they had before, their increase might have been 2 or 3%.
Okay. Next question, Joel. With regard to Muni and TriMet, This says, yes, additional costs, but how many more net new trips and total riders as a result? That wasn't mentioned. Might the cost per passenger trip significantly improve despite costs? And what about the benefits of reducing traffic congestion and other negative externalities?
Well, those transit systems realized those kind of benefits. They realized that the subsidy per passenger would decrease substantially in Austin, even though they had the problems they had. The subsidy per passenger went down from $2.50 a passenger to less than $1.50, making it much more efficient in terms of, or effective in terms of serving its community. And clearly, there would have been some reduction in traffic congestion, but as I said before, most of the studies show that reducing a fare in a major city from $1.50 or thereabouts to nothing really isn't going to be enough to change the travel behavior of people who want to be in their cars for whatever reason. And that's why I was saying that the greater number of passengers tend to be those who already either use the system or are very price sensitive, or bicyclists, students and seniors, etc. But that is why they took a serious look at it. They knew that there would be benefits, and they would like to be able to do it. But when they realized the tremendous revenue they would lose during these tight economic times, they couldn't make it work. They couldn't make it happen.
Okay, Joel, thank you. Let's see, last question. Are there systems with free fares that are not recovering some of the revenue loss from state formulas? If the state funding is not based on ridership, then the agency cannot recoup the fare loss. If some communities in a state do not charge fares and others do, then aren't some communities passing on more of their costs to the state?
Well, they are. And if you're in the locality, that's okay. If you're at the state level, frankly, I think that most state DOTs would say, hey, if this is going to increase ridership, and you've made that decision locally, and you're putting in more of your local money to make this service work, we'll help you, and we'll provide more money because you're making this service more attractive and trying to make transit a more efficient and effective part of the entire transportation network in your community. So, sure, there could be a complaint from others, but they have their choice. They can either join those that have decided to go fare-free, or they can say, well, we've considered it, but all things considered, we've decided not to go that way. And so I don't really think, I didn't hear anybody say, wow, there's a lot of jealousy from other systems in the state. That just hasn't happened, and I don't think it would happen.
Thank you, Joel. In the interest of time, that will be our last question. But if you submitted a question that was not answered, we will make sure that Joel receives that information along with your email address, and we'll follow up with you after the webcast. So any final thoughts, Joel, before we?
Well, yes, the final thought is that the full report should be available to download for free from TCRP sometime in January or February. And there will be a lot more information than I could possibly give you in 30 or 40 minutes on this webcast. And I would strongly encourage you to go to the website, keep your eyes open for that report. But if you do have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer as many as I possibly can if you'd like to email me. And I could probably even forward you a copy of the draft report that was accepted, and you might get your answers more quickly. One other quick thing, Jennifer, is that Corvallis was the most recent to adopt fare-free, but there are other communities that are still thinking about it now. And State College, Pennsylvania, is doing a $100,000 study to determine whether they want to go forward or not. Duluth, Minnesota, is strongly considering it, and Longmont, Colorado, outside of Denver, is also hoping to become a fare-free system. So the issue is not going away by any, or the policy is becoming more popular, and where it seems to make sense, a lot of people are taking a serious look at it.
Thanks, Joel. Well, I'd like to thank you all for your attendance and your participation today. The evaluation is available for you to complete, and we would certainly like to hear your feedback. For those of you that are AICP members, we have applied for credit for this webcast, so you'll be receiving notification once we receive final approval. So on behalf of the Center for Urban Transportation Research, I would like to wish you a healthy and happy new year, since this is our final webcast for 2011, and we hope to see you at future webcasts. Thank you so much.